Yellow and Red makes by Digits 27, Chapter 37. What do you mean you lost him? The voice held no irritation or anger. It was as unemotional and impassive as the face and body that conveyed it. However, distorted by the hologram like effect. I apologize, Leader Sama, but we were trailing the boy through the land of waves when he suddenly dropped off our radar. Ever since the QB Jinchuriki departed Kumagakure, his abilities to surpass his own chakra have been commendable. I believe it has something to do with seals. Even so, we should not have lost him completely like this. It is now more than likely he has vacated the country, and we cannot do anything further without knowing where he's ended up. The impassive holographic figure just stood, stared into space with his ringed eyes as he thought. Very well, this setback is nothing too important. We still have a year and a half before the plan is set in motion properly, and to that effect, I will have Sasori devote some of his resources to relocating the QB. As for you two, it would be against logic to put your talents to waste, so I'm tasking you with locating the Nanabe Jinchuriki. She was one of the ones planned for initial earlier capture, yet she seems to disappeared almost similar to the QB. Both Itachi and Kisame bowed deeply to the hologram. Of course, Leader Sama, we won't fail you. The man merely narrowed his eyes, the already intimidating sight gaining some credibility. See that you don't. The hologram promptly faded from view, leaving both Akatsuki members alone in the cavern just off the coast of the Land of Waves. Kisame let out a loud sigh of relief. He was a fierce opponent, but the leader was freaking him out. Every member of the Akatsuki knew what he could do, and nobody was willing to pit themselves against that. How the hell are we supposed to track down the Nanabe? Isn't that something better suited for Setsu or Sasori? Itachi sent a cold gaze at his partner. He liked it. He liked to think his patience was extensive, but the unattributive man intended to grind on the ex-Nambu captain. Sasori is not the only one with contact. Kisame, now shut up and let's go. We might as well look around Tatikakure for a lead. Kisame just nodded at his partner, his shark-like grin never leaving his face for a moment. It was almost painted on. For a brief moment, his eyelids fluttered from the flashes of lightning out of a window. Naruto wondered if this was what being drunk felt like. His head was fuzzy and unfocused. He couldn't really control his limbs in the way he wanted, and he had a splitting headache that was threatening to force him back into unconsciousness. He groaned, alerting the silhouette of a man who had been watching over him to his awakening. Huh, the kid's up already? Figured you'd be out longer with a blow like that, even if you're shinobi. Naruto's eyes took a moment to focus on the man. Once he stepped out of the shadow in the corner of the room anyway, he managed another incomprehensible groan. Before his head flopped back down again, he felt weak and cold and he couldn't explain it. His body was heavy and unresponsive, and he couldn't even feel his chakra flow. What's going on? His speech was just slightly slurred from his dazed state, and the man standing across from him just laughed at his poor attempt. That's the least of your worries now, kid. You should be more concerned with what already happened. Naruto was still confused and not completely focused, so he just ended up staring at the man oddly, which only caused him to laugh even more. You should not be in your fucking chakra. Without it, you're barely anything at all, are you? Naruto's eyes desperately tried to gain focus. As he looked down at himself, he quickly realized he was tightly bound to a pillar-like structure in a room that was swaying. He came to the conclusion he was on a boat, and the movement of the ocean was doing nothing to help his dizziness. Don't try to channel one of your precious techniques. That seal on your arm almost completely cuts off your chakra. It's based off the thing they use in a Hozuki prison. And sure enough, Naruto looked around and saw a complex seal around his arm that looked strangely like a chain. It explained where the nausea and general weakness were coming from. As somebody with natural high amount of chakra, he was used to it constantly flooding his system. Now he was receiving severe withdrawal symptoms. It was almost like chakra exhaustion without the sweet release of unconsciousness, and it was drawn out. Where's Fu? It was the first coherent thought that made it to his mind, and he almost seemed to gargle through it. The large man only chuckled, looking towards the door of the fairly small cabin they were both in. Little brat with the fucking hair color. Oh, she's long gone. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he felt his blood boil. Even with the seal in place, he could feel Yubi's chakra practically writhing behind the barrier that had been suddenly placed upon it, begging for release. What did you do to her? Naruto coughed up blood as the man's steel-toed boot promptly met the side of his face, sending waves of pain through his body. Getting a little forward, aren't we? You're in no position to be talking to me like that, kid. The only reason you're even alive is because we wanted to see if you have some kind of bounty on you. The room fell silent again, as Naruto checked to see he hadn't lost any teeth, while the man returned to his corner, although his smirk was still visible. If you must know, I assume she's on one of the slave ships bound for water country. Perhaps that people that take a ride on those tubes don't ever come back. He was positively grinning now, which made Naruto bite down on his angry outburst. Somebody finally entered the room through a small cabin door, and the man's grin turned a bit more businesslike. The barely hidden glee was still visible, though. The new arrival quickly handed the man before him a small leather-bound book before quickly departing, never even glancing at Naruto once. The first man just idly flicked through the book, taking time to compare certain photos with the blonde before him until he reached the last page. Well, seems that there isn't a single mention of you anywhere. Either this book is outdated or you're a shitty ninja. Either way, you have no further use to us. He clapped once, and instantly a few more men, sailors by the looks of it, hurried into the room, quickly untied Naruto and slung him between them. Normally Naruto would have tried to struggle or escape, but he felt constantly exhausted with the seal placed on him. Right now, the blonde had difficulty speaking, never mind coming up with a decent strategy for escaping that required he overpowered the three burly men without the use of chakra. The rain stung and slashed at his face as the men carried him out onto the metal deck that overflowed with water. The storm was brewing high overhead, and in the distance the ominous crashes of thunder could be heard. Below them, the sea churred and boiled in petulance for the sky unstaging it, and it attempted to relieve its anger on the small boat. The sailors seemed unfazed, going about their business and maintaining the ship's course with a practiced ease. Naruto was more concerned with the fact they were carrying him closer to the edge of the ship, closer to the thrashing waves that gleamed from a lightning strike, almost in anticipation. Without more than a word, the men dumped Naruto's body unceremoniously into the swirling void of the sea. The salty waters swallowing him instantly. With fervor and panic, Naruto tried to get his body to respond enough to swim upwards. It was fruitless. He was too drained and he couldn't use his ninja techniques. He had managed to grab a lungful of air before his hasty departure, so at least he wasn't sinking too far. However, he was still at the unbending mercy of the tumultuous seas, tossed around like a piece of kelp trapped in an eddy. Naruto's lungs began to burn from the lack of oxygen reaching his body, and in one last attempt he kicked his legs wildly. With an enormous gasp for air, the resilient blonde resurfaced and panted, using his barely functioning legs to keep him aloft as long as he could. He looked around, but it was a little difficult to spot anything with the storm raging on around him and the darkness of the light. He thought he spotted some kind of landmass off in the distance, but he could have been imagining it. He kicked a few more times, but his energy was finally completely drained. At that moment, a larger than normal wave grabbed onto Naruto, pulling him with it as he was tugged towards shore by some invisible force. It was almost as if the water had a grip on his body and was actually bringing him somewhere. His usual curious mind left the question blank as he continued to struggle for even the smallest breaths of oxygen he could manage. He felt his eyelids droop, and there couldn't have been a worse moment for his body to catch up to him. Darkness encroached on his vision even as bubbles and swirling blue water rushed over his head, completely blocking out the light of those storms above. Fu once again fought the urge to struggle against the itchy bindings that kept her hands from being used. Naruto had long ago told her how to escape such poorly made ties, but that wasn't a problem. That lay in the 20 or so men that stood as escort, slowly marching the small group of people through the silent forest. She had a heavy canvas bag over her head, which made it both difficult to breathe and hear, and a few of her fellow prisoners had already passed out a few times. Before she had been sufficiently bound and covered, she had managed to see a fair few of the other branded with some kind of chain-like seal, which seemed to block off the chakra. She had only been spared because nobody even suspected she had any training as a shinobi, mostly under the assumption that because she didn't wear a headband, she wasn't a shinobi. She had actually been offered a forehead protector in Kumo, but Naruto had declined for her, only telling her that he had a surprise for her later. She didn't realize that it would save her life like it had now. As it was, she was able to easily keep up with the rather mediocre pace that the slaves or whoever they were set. She had been slowly loosening the rope around her wrist to the point where with a single flick of her wrist they would fall to the ground. She figured it would be best to escape from these men before they reached wherever it was they were going. These were just foot soldiers, that much was obvious, just grunts to carry out the menial labor. There was surely somebody more powerful behind an operation like this, especially somebody who had access to seals as complex as something she might have seen Naruto working on. Her thoughts drifted to her brother. She had seen him get kicked out on the boat because he let down his guard, all because of her. She had fallen for the simplest of genjutsu, used to lure in potential targets and incapacitate them before they even knew what was happening. She had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker, and now she didn't even know where Naruto was. She knew he would come for her. He was her brother and the first person to ever truly show her kindness, and to such a degree that she wouldn't have thought imaginable before. Even though her confidence, though even through her confidence, though she had nagging doubts because of her incompetence, her only son might be dead or sealed with that mark and in a similar situation to her own. For all she knew, he was in the very same group as her, equally bound and restrained. It didn't seem likely to her. The Naruto she knew would have already found a counter for the seal, broken his bonds, and dealt with all the guards present before even one of them could mutter, "What?" Her head fell forwards again. She was useless in comparison. Even if she escaped these bonds and her captors, she would do nothing for those poor people in the same situation. Beneath the canvas bag, her eyes hardened until the orange of her irises encroached on a menacing red. She wouldn't let her brother down like that. Abandoning all these people to their fate would make her no better than the people currently leading them further into the forest. A grin formed on her impish features as a plan began to circulate her mind. A mind slowly molded into one of a dangerous prankster by the Kyubi Jinchuriki himself. It was surprising what the practical application of a simple prank could do. Planning, organizing, forethought, skill, all required to pull off the perfect prank, or in her case, the perfect escape. Naruto's eyes refused to obey him. No matter how much he sent the mental command to the muscles in his face, his eyelids wouldn't lift. He was being carried, that much was obvious from the strange orientation of his body and the slight bobbing motion of his carrier's gait. He had woken up a few minutes ago, actually moderately surprised that he wasn't dead. Unless this was the afterlife, in that case, it sucked. The last thing he remembered was the sight of the waters overtaking his head as he slowly drifted down into the crushing depths of the ocean. It would appear somebody either saw fit to rescue him, which would make him curious to their intentions, or he had the good luck to wash up on a shore somewhere. He had an inkling it was the former. Naruto and good luck just didn't mix. His mission history was testament to that fact, unless of course it concerned gambling. Then it was a whole different story. Giving up on his eyes for now, he focused on the more pressing matter of the seal on his arm, blocking his chakra. It was no wonder he felt so possibly drained. He can't access his countless reserves at all. Not a drop. Not even the fox's chakra could breach this rip off of a prison releasing jutsu. Naruto knew all too well of Hokuzijo prison and their infamous sealing technique. It had been an area of ramped study during his time in Kumo. He only hoped that it came without the small clause of incinerating the subject if the plier got too far away. He groaned without meaning to. The feeling of emptiness inside of him, so foreign and unnatural that he had the urge to throw up. His savior or kidnapper, as the case might turn out, stopped and quickly set Naruto down against the tree, checking him over again after the groan. With a great deal of effort, Naruto's eyes managed to finally grind open and stare blurrily into the face of the man who saved him. It was a moment for his features. It took a moment for his features to come into focus, but Naruto could see a face with eyes wary of battle, one with a large scar running vertically through it. He had a well-grown beard that curved around to almost form a mustache, and the rest of his feature were masked by a hood. He wore a kirigakuri headband, which thankfully did not bear the slash of a missing nin, although with the missed reputation that still might be bad for Naruto. Are you alright? There wasn't much sympathy or compassion in the man's voice. He asked more to make sure that carrying him all this way hadn't been a waste of time. Naruto nodded in response, standing after a moment to deal with his dizziness and the lack of chakra. Where am I? His voice was hoarse and dry, and the man who had saved him quickly pulled out a canteen of water, which Naruto happily drank. We're currently en route through the land of water to one of the outlying bases, so that somebody can assess you, so that my superiors can make a decision regarding your future. Naruto gulped a little. It didn't sound all that friendly, and he had to wonder what these bases were used for. As if reading his mind, the grizzled man just continued. I am a part of the current rebel forces that are seeking to overthrow our tyrant of a cage, Yagura. He spat the name quite literally into the damp grass beside him. Naruto just took in the information. He was now in water country somehow. He knew it wasn't too far from Wave, but it was still a long way off. Not only that, but he had managed to stumble right into the middle of a civil war that would determine the fate of the land of water for years. Nope, Naruto and luck didn't fit together. His eyes widened in realization. Fu! It was a harsh whisper at his throat, as his throat was still parched but the man seemed to understand, and the sentimental behind the cry. I'm sorry, but I did not detect anybody else out in the waters. You were lucky I was even able to find you at all. Maybe you should thank Mei-sama for tasking me with a mission so close to the coast. Not didn't know who Mei was, but he was certainly going to thank them graciously. His head fell as he absorbed what the man had told him. That Fu hadn't been with him. He already knew that in a way the man who had placed the seal told him she was on a different ship, as if he could once again read Naruto's mind. The older man calmly spoke up. I wouldn't be worried if your friend was also taken by the thugs. Then they most likely they are most likely in captivity on their way to one of the slave camps dotted around the country. Our organization runs raids on them occasionally to put Yagura off balance. There's a small probability that they could be recovered. Naruto's eyes hardened into slits. Once he got his damn seal off, then he would go after Fu himself. Corrupt Kage be damned. My name is Tsuruguri. By the way, if you are able to move, then I suggest we get going again. It is unwise to be standing around so idle while not in the safety of our bases. Naruto just nodded, taking a shaking first step forward, but he managed to get his bearings and jogged after Tsurugi. It was infuriating not being able to use his chakra to bounce through the trees like he normally would. Without it, he was forced to rely on his rather unresponsive and sluggish muscles, which by a civilian standard was still fast. But this was the pace academy students in Tsuna could move at. I must ask, because I am curious, why did those thugs attack you and brand you with the seal only to throw you overboard? They had been running in silence for a while now, Naruto having to rely on the other man to lead him through the unfamiliar territory. As far as I'm aware, they saved that seal for the bloodline users they managed to capture in order to subdue them. Do you hold the bloodline? Naruto shook his head as he ran and almost laughed to himself. He carried something very different in his blood. He had noticed that as well, without his chakra acting as an intermediary between them. Kyubi hadn't said a word since he woke up. He figured he probably wouldn't be able to access his mindscape either until the damn binding came off, and that was why he had spent the last hour studying his arm and figuring out what was off, countering figuring out ways of countering or removing it. He used to be a Veritas stamina powerhouse. Now, without a single drop of chakra coursing through him, he found even his distance beginning to wear on him. No, I do not know why they targeted me or Fu, but I think she may have been in some kind of genjutsu to let her away from me onto their boat. They knocked me out, and when I woke up, the seal was already on me. When they found out I wasn't in the bingo books, they threw me overboard. It was probably so they didn't have any mouths to feed. Plus, I would have cost them a lot of trouble. He smirked a little at that. No bonds had ever held him for very long, and this deal would be no different. Strange, it isn't like the thugs under Yagura's employ to get rid of such an ideal prisoner, shinobi or not. Perhaps this speaks of instability within their ranks. I will have to inform Mei-sama about this when we return. Naruto just sighed as the man picked up his pace, forcing Naruto to drag his weary and lethargic body after him. They stopped a short while later, much to Naruto's thanks, although he couldn't work out the reason. They had branched off from the main path a while ago and had been steadily making their way through scrubland for the past hour. Tsurugi just seemed to stop at random, searching with his eyes for something Naruto couldn't see because he didn't know where to look. Finally, the other man's eye settled on a small yellowed rock that seemed a little out of place amongst its brothers. He picked it up, revealing the seal on the flip side, which he quickly poured chakra into. Before them, the ground opened up with a dull groan of rock and earth parting to reveal a rough hem staircase leading them into what Naruto guessed was the rebel base. Tsurugi wasted no time in pushing Naruto down the steps before himself following, sealing the exit behind him as torches flared into life on either side. Naruto looked down the long passageway that had been opened to them and groaned, "More walking." The small convoy had stopped for the night. Even slaves knew that running their prisoners in the slavers knew even running their prisoners into the ground wasn't exactly beneficial, and they needed rest as well. They slept while a smaller contingent of 5 thugs watched the prisoners, rotating in shifts every few hours or so. In that time, Fuku had managed to steadily move around the clearing that the prisoners were resting in, spreading her plan to all who would listen. In that time, she had also managed to find out more about just what was going on. Most of these people were bloodline users, or at least had been until the chakra was sealed away. They had been rounded up in a sort of purge ordered by the Kirikakure's Mizukage himself, and ordered into various slave camps dotting the nation. Fu had been disgusted by this. It was the highest form of xenophobia and bigotry she could find of, almost reminiscent of the way jerky are treated. Apparently, the Mizukage feared the power of the bloodline users, becoming paranoid in his reign. The village was already known as the Bloody Mist Village by then, but Yagura's reign only made it worse. At first, it was minor things: a family member disappearing from their house, a few establishments burned down accidentally. Soon enough, though, it was a nationwide hunt for anybody with even a trace of a bloodline. That, of course, led to a rebellion when the bloodline users and those that sympathized found out what was going on. Well, that was almost 3 years ago now, and the Civil War still rages seemingly endlessly for those involved. With each passing story, families being torn apart, and the clans being hunted down to the last man, woman, or child. Fu's blood boiled hotter. It only hardened her resolve as she stealthily moved about, quickly informing everybody of her plan. And there were a few people waiting with bated breath for the guard to rotate their shifts, and even more feigning sleep. Finally, the moment came, and the guards came out to relieve their companions. This now gave them a few hours before the prisoners would be checked on again, and without further delay, Fu began. It wasn't a particularly complicated plan. As a matter of fact, it was pretty simple, but sometimes the simplest of plans are also the best. As soon as the retired guards were out of earshot, Fu stood up calmly, attracting the newer guard attention. "Sit back down, bloodline scum!" Fucha smirked, calmly standing despite having her arms supposedly bound. "This better work. I can't really take chances with these people's lives." This was it. Months of training, and it had boiled down to a make or break moment like this. The guard sneered at her defiance, storming over with intent to break it out of her. Fu waited until he was close before she took a deep breath and let them loose. 2 wings sprouted from her back, tinged light green and translucent like a dragonfly's. They astounded everybody, guards and prisoners alike. Fu had only told them she would provide the distraction, and she didn't say what it would be. Her guards momentarily hesitation was all she needed, and with a misty, mighty flap from her wings, her feet left the earth and took to the skies. Once airborne, she finally loosened the ropes around her wrist and rubbed them gingerly. Why doesn't she have the seal? She smirked at the guards' panic reactions. They ran around like headless chickens without the training to adapt to such a strange situation. Their disorder was exactly what she needed. As she took a deep breath and all the prisoners ducked down, shielding their eyes with her lungs expanding to capacity. Fu let it all out at once, spreading a fine gold dust across the sky. The particles caught all available light from the moon and the campfires, dispersing it with such increased intensity that most of the thugs grouped their heads in pain. Fu just smirked from above them in the sky. She whistled loudly, an ear-splitting sound that pierced the night sky and let all prisoners know it was time to escape. They rushed to their feet and took off in the direction away from the guards' camp. Fu figured getting away was the priority. Finding somewhere to actually go could come later. The thugs were still on the ground with their hands clasped over their eyes, or rubbing them furiously to get their vision back. Fu knew they would be out of commission for about 5 minutes. She had never permanently blinded anyone with the power she produced. Still, in the air she flew after the fleeing prisoners, making sure to leave behind a few surprises for when the other guards caught up. Her wings fluttered so fast they just appeared to be blurs as they kept her thin body afloat in the air. She couldn't help but be intoxicated. Ever since she found out about her half transformation, she had tried to be in the sky as much as possible. The only problem was, Fu felt herself dip to one side suddenly as her balance was thrown off before her body jerked back upright. Suddenly, the same thing happened on the other side before she quickly flew down in a less than graceful display to land on a branch before she completely lost control. Flying was difficult. Her wings weren't a constant thing like Naruto's tails or ears. They were merely things she could summon on a whim without any ill effect from Chomei's chakra. The problem was using them was exhausting. It became easier each time, but she was still left with burning shoulder blades and an aching back. She rushed through the trees, not finding it hard to catch up to the fleeing prisoners, considering they were deprived of their chakra. They were all resting in a clearing when she caught up. Apparently, even a short run was now difficult for the bloodline users. The only benefit of the seal was that it suppressed their chakra from detecting, meaning only Fu had to actively block her own. It wasn't too difficult because flying always took it out of her, and Naruto had already taught her the importance of masking it, especially as Jinchuriki with so many people after them. She dropped down from a branch, surprising many of the people who without the chakra enhanced senses, felt rather vulnerable. Okay, who knows where we can get these seals off of you? She was kind of annoyed with herself for not thinking past this point, as were a few of the people in the clearing if their faces were anything to go on. Luckily, she was saved from embarrassment when a man wearing strange earrings, a kirigakure headband, and an eye patch with light blue hair resembling a shark fin put his hand up. I know somewhere we can go. Both Naruto stood before Naruto stood an amazingly attractive woman. Her flowing auburn hair cascaded before her back and was split into 4 bangs at the front, two covering flag jackets over a dark blue shirt and blue and gray camouflage pants with dark black boots. She gave off the air of a powerful and experienced military leader, and Naruto knew he was looking at the leader of the Kiri Rebellion, Mei. Tsuguri, who the hell is this? Naruto felt a large bead of sweat form over his temple. She certainly didn't speak like an accomplished commander. Mei-sama, I rescued this boy off the coast. He bears the seal of those bloodline users captured by Yagura. The tall woman looked over Naruto only once, preparing to stare at the map in front of her, which seemed to detail the land's outlying Kirigakure. Sorry, kid, we don't have any seal masters. Nobody here can remove that for you. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the implication. He also didn't like being constantly referred to as a kid. I don't need one. I can remove it myself if I could access my chakra. All I need for somebody is for them to channel their chakra into a seal I draw. Mei suddenly lost interest in the map in front of her, turning to stare at Naruto with a smoldering gaze. What's your name, kid? Naruto's eyes twitched again, but he kept his cool like he had practiced for so long. Naruto Uzumaki. May's eyebrow raised in surprise before she covered up the display of emotion. Uzumaki. Have you ever heard of somebody named Kushina Uzumaki? Naruto shook his head slowly. Sorry, never heard of her. Now he was rather intrigued. This woman said the name like she might have been like she might have been family. Naruto had never known anything about his family before. May just seemed disappointed by the revelation. Sorry, I've never known anything about my family. I was an orphan before I could even remember things. May just nodded sadly. Orphans were a common sight now in the land of water. It was one of the reasons she fought so hard. Kid, if you get that seal off, could you do it for others? Naruto nodded while May's eyes lit up in joy. Perfect. Then what are we waiting for? End of chapter 37.